The sun always seemed to rise slowly over this part of the basin, and that was why Jul liked it. It would crest the mountains that encircled the tiny jungle like a disk of shining gold, the daylight creeping along the treetops until it reached the reclining alien. He moved ever so slightly to let the sun warm him better, then snuggled against the cradle of interwoven branches and vines he'd shaped from the trees around him. It was technically against regulation to use a bioshaper to create a hammock in the experimental zone, but he knew no one would care. Even the fiercest flying lizard would not be able to detect him with a functioning omnicloak, and even if one did, he could simply discard this physical shell and return to the mothership for another. He'd be mocked mercilessly if that did happen, though. Poor Oman. Jul snorted and turned himself over, letting his body absorb more precious, warming light. His thoughts were drifting peacefully through dreamy visions of DNA sequences and morphogenetic fields when his thoughts suddenly grew cold. He didn't even bother to open his triple eyes.
"Xantham, can you move?" Jul mumbled. "You're in my light."
"And you are napping in the treetops again," Xantham said, continuing to cast a shadow over Jul, robbing him of the precious sunlight he'd been craving. Xantham sighed and crossed two mantis-like limbs. "I told you this would happen if you based your physical form off of those sloth creatures. Your contributions to the experiment have fallen by 36%.
"It's efficient for deep thought," Jul mumbled, lazily scratching his back with a clawed hand. "I have my brain set up to run simulations of possible genetic modifications to the current test group. There's no need to move until I complete my thought experiments. Then my contribution percentage will increase 1,000-fold.
"And you need to do it out here in the field, not on the ship."
"My current form runs at a far higher efficiency with plenty of natural sunlight. So, if you wouldn't mind..."
Xantham sighed and moved to the side with a mental command to his anti-grav pack. "You'd better soak up the sun while you can," he said. "The High Shaper just made the announcement we'll be leaving to check in on the Kurlat system's progress in a few months."
"Announcement?" Jul shifted in irritation. "I didn't hear anything."
"You were asleep."
"I was running subconscious simulations," Jul insisted. "We've only been here a few centuries. Why the rush?"
"The High Shaper is quite satisfied with how the giant lizards..."
"Dinosaurs."
"Are we calling them that now? Whatever. He is satisfied we've enhanced them well enough for this stage. Fearsome natural defenses, sharp instincts, hardy immune systems. We've given them enough gifts that they should be able to survive quite well on their own. And we have not checked in on the great serpents of Kurland for nearly 40 million years.
40 million, Jul grunted. Void only knows what evolution could do to them in that time without our guiding hand.
Careful with the arrogance. We've seen it ruin too many a species, Xantham said. These dinosaurs are quite difficult to kill. They should be top-tier survivors, able to evolve intellect easily. Anyway, Earth will be fine without us. Wrap up your experiments as quickly as you can and turn in the results. Then return to the mothership. We'll return in 1 million years or 2, depending on how things go. Xantham paused, his antenna twitching. You'll probably need to put that form on ice and pick one that swims better if you intend to be in the field so often in Kurland.
A waste of time, if you ask me, Jul said, slowly emerging from his immense nest of morphed plant matter. Every species that stays in the water ends up with a society far too communal, or never develops one at all. Kurland will never yield a perfect species. We should focus our efforts elsewhere to win the great contest.
That is for the High Shaper to decide, Xantham said quietly. Not humble field scientists like ourselves. Truth be told, Joel had stopped caring about the great contest 200 million years ago, but he wasn't stupid enough to mention that to anyone. It was, after all, what the entire Commodon civilization was built around at this point. It was what had replaced the terrible star-destroying galactic wars of the previous era. A contest where each star-faring civilization would strive to create a truly perfect society, one capable of not only surviving, but thriving for eternity. With most of the starfarers having achieved some form of immortality, such a society was now direly needed. Whoever won would prove their right to lead the galaxy, and it would be self-evident. It was far preferable to the immensely destructive wars that had littered the galaxy with black holes and asteroid belts that had once been planets shining with cities. Once declared, the 7 remaining civilizations had begun the contest with uncommon zeal. The Bulgovians had immediately begun developing extensive and robust computer intelligences to calculate all possible laws and pass the correct ones. Their civilization was consumed in just a brief millennia once the Bulgovian circuit judges made life illegal. The Zuk-Jofo closed their borders and embarked on a mass spiritual journey that ended with each of the diminutive creatures suddenly vanishing all at once. Some believed they achieved enlightenment before developing the perfect civilization. Others suspected the much-delayed activation of a misfired time-space weapon by their ancestral enemies, the hated Dvoraths. Of the remaining 4 civilizations, 3 tried perfecting their societies with the usual mix of philosophy, technological advances, and try-fail cycles. The 4th civilization were the Commodons, and they remembered something that the others seemed to have forgotten. You cannot build a lasting structure without the best materials. An everlasting society of peace, plenty, and above all else, ability would need to have a truly exceptional species at its core. Sadly, the universe had not produced one. The Zuk-Jofo were physically frail. The Bulgovians had been terrifically lazy. The Farrakins were barely smart enough to have discovered FTL. The Bluth fought all the time, and the Ikekians needed immense amounts of energy to do anything. The less said about the Vortiem, the better. Of course, the Commodons too had a fatal flaw they were sadly all too aware of. It took millions of years for an infant Commodon to grow from an ethereal mass of sparkling thoughts to the spindle of light capable of manifesting and controlling a physical form. It took another 100,000 for a Commodon just to learn how the physical world worked after so long in the upper dimension. No, the universe had not produced a species capable of perfection, so the Commodons would have to produce one themselves. Joel thought the entire thing was just a big farce at this point. No one was going to produce perfection, societal or genetic. But the contest seemed to be working, since no galactic wars had occurred for as long as he'd been alive. And he supposed pursuing perfection wasn't the worst way to pass the time. But the best would have been to just sit in the sun a little more.
"There's barely any sunlight on Querulent," Joel mumbled. "Just those terrible gray rain clouds. Terrible gray everything."
"You want us to leave you here?" Xantham asked, perking up with mock enthusiasm. "I can tell the captain. You'll be fine here until we come back, right?"
"It's tempting,"
Joel said, rolling over so he could see the jungle basin they'd appropriated for their experiments.
"There's more here than dinosaurs, you know."
I know, Xantham said, nodding. "We've barely catalogued the mammals. Some of the primates."
"Primates!"
Joel snorted, scratching himself with a long claw.
"Another waste. We should investigate the potential of modification to the sloths."
"You just want an excuse to lounge around in that form for all eternity." Joel belonged to the transmogrifists, those Commodons who believed once the perfect species was produced, the Commodons should take their form and live among them. Xantham belonged to the Guides, those Commodons who believed that it was their cosmic role to produce the perfect species, then step aside. They had argued for millions of years over this, but still managed to remain friends. Besides, Xantham asked, crossing his carapaced arms, what would a race of advanced sloths do? Develop a perfect society built around sitting in the sun?
There are worse things to build a society around.
3 million years later, Jul and Xantham returned to Earth to find all of their experiments completely ruined. The planet was shrouded in ice, their prized dinosaurs were dying or dead, and the High Shaper had gotten so angry he'd accidentally incinerated his own body. His mood had not improved now that he was forced to float in the ship's core and reconstitute himself. Meanwhile, Xantham and Jul were stuck taking samples in the snow-covered fields of Earth.
Void-cursed meteor,
Jul mumbled as he jammed the microsampler into another shattered skeleton and retrieved a sample of DNA. He operated the device with spindly, crab-like limbs, having been forced to change to a new body several thousand years ago. He still missed his sloth form. A little bit of sun, and you could work without working for months. He still couldn't believe it had been confiscated for failure to meet basic operational requirements. The thought made him even more irritable, and he jammed the sampler into the next skeleton with sudden force.
Void-cursed planet! Void-cursed contest!
Don't let the...
Yes, Xantham, I know,
Jul mumbled, pulling the sample out from the device and placing it in his gather sack.
Don't let the overseers hear that talk. Wouldn't want them to take away this amazing crab form that's so great for the physical work I love doing.
They'll probably let you use something else once we've cleaned up. This is urgent, Xantham said, putting his own sampler away with a shaggy arm. Xantham, too, had been forced to change forms, which made Jul feel slightly better. He looked like a walking wall of fur now. He kept talking. We've only got a few years to gather up enough samples to analyze before they begin to lose potency. Then we're leaving. The High Shaper says there's no point starting over when the planet is like this. We'll come back when it's warmer.
A waste. This entire excursion is a waste,
Jul mumbled, leaning on his spade-like sampler.
Your precious dinosaurs failed. All that effort to concentrate traits beneficial to survival, and you forgot to make them resistant to cold. Amazing.
I didn't forget, Xantham sniffed. I was in charge of scales, and I did my job well, thank you. You could fire a Q-ray at some of the bigger dinos, and they'd have a shot at surviving. If they'd evolved intelligence quickly enough, they could have battled the cold easily. Such a promising start wasted.
You couldn't make scales with a good degree of insulation?
You need more than good insulation. Hey, stop for a moment. What's that? Xantham waved one of his hairy limbs at the forest in the distance. Jul's eye clusters barely made out a shadowy figure dart back into the tree line.
Huh. I guess some of the primates have survived, Jul said. How do you feel about that, Xantham? Your precious lizards were beaten by the mammals you said weren't worth noting.
Don't put words in my mouth, Xantham grumbled. It is curious, though. I was so sure the primates wouldn't make it. Was that one walking upright? They weren't doing that the last time we were here. Oh well, let's head back to the ship. Got your next form picked out?
Not until we find out for sure where the ship's heading. I'm not taking a carapace body to another ice planet.
The cold was finally beginning to recede when the ship returned to Earth. It had been an eventful but disheartening absence. Curulent was lost, the great serpents that had been evolving there having been wiped out by bloody wars almost immediately after they had developed the concept of nations. Genetic samples were retrieved, but the species was doomed, and the High Shaper deemed further intervention a waste of time. Even worse, there were rumors the Vortiem were experimenting with a hive mind society and making progress for the first time in eons towards winning the contest. That notion rankled every Komodan. Hive minds were cheating. You couldn't have a society with just one consciousness. even if it was made up of lesser ones. The other civilizations agreed, but the Vortiem insisted they were well on their way to perfection. What would happen if the Vortiem insisted they had won, but no one acknowledged it? Would the wars start all over again after such a long time of peace? The thought distracted Jul as he flew invisibly over the earth, conducting its first survey since the Commodans left so long ago. He paused as he saw something glow far below, something small and flickering that would never have been noticed without the powerful image enhancers his survey ship contained. Jul's triple eyes widened, and he began to record. "Fire!" Jul said, slamming his hands down on the table. "They had made fire!" Now, the High Shaper said, floating in his jelly tank. Their leader's new form was that of an immense cephalopod with a huge head, as much brain power as possible crammed into one body. He played with one of his face tentacles absent-mindedly.
"Did you see them make fire? Perhaps they merely harnessed the leftovers of a lightning strike. A jump to fire is quite extraordinary considering the state the primates were in when we left them."
"It is," Jul agreed, keying up the rest of the images he'd collected. "And do you know what else is quite extraordinary? All of this!" Holographic pictures floated around the mothership's council chambers, displaying the now hairless apes wearing skins, crafting crude tools from stone, and even painting strange designs on the rocky walls of their cavern homes. Jul gestured at the pictures in triumph as the assembled Commodans gasped. "Tool use, clothes, possibly even art! The rudimentary elements of a society, my friends and colleagues! The dinosaurs have died, but nature herself has given us a new opportunity to win the contest. The primates of this planet have evolved rapidly without our intervention while we have been away. At the bare minimum, this needs to be studied, researched. We can isolate and refine whatever trait sparked such rapid growth. Alternatively, we can select these evolved primates, whom I have dubbed humans, as the focus of our genetic modification campaign. If we focus our efforts, perhaps we can perfect them long before the Vortiem hive minds gets up to any mischief." The council chamber broke out into a storm of whispers, murmurs, and general conferring as the High Shaper raised its primary tentacles for silence.
"Field Scientist Jul, these are indeed noteworthy findings you bring to us, but are you certain of them?"
the Shaper asked.
"I find it very strange that these humans look so different from the primates they evolved from. Are we certain these are not a new species transplanted to the planet as part of some sabotage by our rivals in the contest? Are we certain," the Shaper's voice dropped dangerously low, "that no one among us has performed illegal meddling to produce such a species?"
There was a long silence.
"Suraj, I'm looking in your direction."
"It was one time!" the little researcher protested. "I haven't done it since, honest." "Suraj is innocent this time," Jul said, dismissing the images with a keystroke. "I was very thorough with my checks. This was natural evolution. I repeat myself. We should make the humans our platform for the next series of experiments." Another round of murmurings. "Come now," another field scientist said. "This is impressive to be sure, but these primates are lacking in so many ways. Where are the fangs, the claws, the telepathic abilities, ability to fly?" There was a brief rain of laughter at Jul's expense, and he rolled all three of his eyes. "What does any of that have to do with building a perfect society?" Jul exclaimed. "Maybe this has been our problem for the last few million years. We're so caught up in creating an impressive life form to ensure it will survive long enough to evolve that we forgot that evolution doesn't care about interesting extras or what we can accomplish with our science. Evolution only cares about results. The results on Earth have been that humans have survived where our precious pets died."
"Calm down,"
the High Shaper said, floating backward in his tank.
"There is a simple compromise to be made here. We still have other experiments to check in on. We'll finish our rounds and return in, say, a mere 34,000 years. If these primate spawn are advancing as rapidly as your data indicates, then we should return to find some impressive progress. Perhaps they'll make it to metalworking or agriculture.
Several Commodans scoffed at the notion, but the High Shaper silenced them with a watery glare.
It is possible,
He stated.
If they advance so quickly, then perhaps their lack of more obvious natural talents can be overlooked.
But High Shaper, Joel protested.
34,000 years.
The cephalopod commanded.
I have spoken.
Xantham bowed his head in sympathy when Joel passed by him on the way back to his quarters.
I thought it was extremely notable data you collected, he said. 34,000 years isn't a long time. We'll be back before you know it.
I'm aware. It's just frustrating,
Joel said.
Setback after setback lately, and when we find something promising, our first instinct is to ignore it. May whatever people lead the galaxy never have such terrible blindness as yours. Do they not think I'm serious?
Everyone knows you're serious,
Xantham said. His eyes brightened.
You haven't mentioned your precious sloths once since returning with your findings on the humans.
Thanks,
Joel said.
Pah! With our luck, we'll return to find the humans wiped out by a second meteor impact. 34,000 years.
It'll be fine,
Xantham said, patting Joel on the back.
What can happen in so short a time?
Xantham was right about one thing at least. The 34,000 years did pass quickly. The other planets that held life being monitored and meddled with were progressing, but slowly. The usual tests were run on each planet, a comforting routine after the disastrous loss of both Corulent and the Earth dinosaurs. Joel was able to lose himself in the work, but he found his thoughts increasingly occupied with the strange primates he'd found, the humans. How were they faring in that ice-scarred world of theirs? They must be strong to have survived that long, but strength wasn't always enough. The dinosaurs proved that. Chance alone could decimate a species in its infant stages. Would the promise of humanity be smothered in its cradle by an uncaring universe? Would it be the Commodans' fault for not watching over them when they had the chance? Joel had never cared so much about something before. He wasn't sure he liked the experience. Things were easier when the two things he thought about were science and sunlight. He hadn't even done anything to the humans. They had evolved naturally. He had just found them. Did all discoverers feel such responsibility to their finds? Or maybe he was just excited to find something extraordinary after so many years of failed experiments. He was still thinking about that within the comfort of his chambers when the ship arrived back in Earth orbit and had to immediately take evasive maneuvers. Alerts blared throughout the ship. Joel barely had time to process this before he realized he was receiving a direct order to report to the High Shaper. Joel burst from his chambers and started for the bridge. He met Xantham on the way there.
What's going on? Another meteor? The sun going nova?
Joel asked, falling into step beside his friend. Xantham shook his head.
Active satellites in orbit. Ships, too. We're engaging the emergency cloak. That's all I know,
Xantham said. Joel emitted a strangled gasp.
Ships? Here? How?
He exclaimed.
Earth's the most out-of-the-way planet we use for our studies. The other civilizations shouldn't even know this system is here, much less that we're visiting it.
His voice dropped to an urgent whisper.
Is it the Vortium? The Bluth? They could invade the planet and technically not break any treaty since we have no holdings there. They could invade and ruin the experiment without declaring war. It would just be sabotage then. Murderous, barbaric, human-killing sabotage.
I don't know,
Xantham said.
We'll find out when we get to the bridge.
You got summoned too?
Joel asked. Xantham fixed him with a quizzical frown.
No, I'm a backup shield tech. Why were you summoned to the bridge?
I don't know,
Joel admitted. It wouldn't be long before he found out.
This is impossible,
Jules said as the pictures came in from the long-range scans. Even under full cloak, a Commodon mothership had extraordinary observational capability. Through tinted and shielded windows, the pilots of the many ships buzzing around Earth could be seen with Commodon technology. Humans. There was no alien invasion. The secret experiment hadn't been discovered. The humans had jumped from caves to starships in slightly less than 34,000 years. It had taken the Commodons 4 billion years to do the same, only making the jump to the stars out of necessity when their sun began to die.
I expected that sort of reply, but wanted to be sure,
the High Shaper said, still in his cephalopod form.
You can't account for this either. There was no hidden trait or circumstance you forgot to share with us in your last report. It's not fake either. We've confirmed it by going over planet-side scans. Vast cities thrumming with electrical power, fields of tamed crops. Everywhere the mumblings of engines, from combustion to electrical. We even have readings indicating the first steps towards fusion power. I congratulate you, Joel. You were absolutely correct about these humans of yours. Which is a shame, because we've utterly missed our window to do anything. If we'd taken your advice, the great contest might have been over already, or at least we'd finally have our building blocks ready for the next phase of our plan. As it is, they've gone from being an answer to our prayers to being a horrendous threat.
They're already beginning to explore space,
Joel mumbled, looking out at the crowded Earth orbit.
Already beginning to explore space, and without even a shred of help from us. Maybe this is for the best.
Pardon?
The Shaper asked.
The High Shaper, don't you see?
Joel asked as a slow smile crept across his face.
All our knowledge, all our science, and nature still beat us. It produced a species that ran where the rest of the galaxy walked. The ultimate organism was the only one we didn't modify. The dinosaurs, the great serpents, dead ends, because we kept giving them what we thought they needed instead of what would actually help them thrive. Humans, eh? Let us retreat to the system's edge before they detect us. Let us see what they can do.
They can do too much already,
the Shaper murmured.
We already have to use our Omni-Cloaks at full capacity to fool all of their sensors. A concentrated barrage from their weapons actually has the potential to damage even our mothership now. Outrun them? Sure, but it's far closer than I'd like. All of this in a few thousand years? Think of where they will be in 1,000,000.
That was our goal from the beginning, Shaper, Xantham said, speaking up with uncharacteristic solemnity. Did you think that if we found the ultimate species, they would only be a slight improvement over us? I'm thinking of where they will be in 1,000,000 years. I'm thinking of a future where we no longer worry about the Vortiem hive mind or the Bluth's rampant aggression. I'm thinking of a future where the contest ends without a new war beginning. Maybe the winners were meant to be the humans all along. We can make it happen.
We didn't produce them,
the Shaper whispered.
They advance too fast. Too fast. What happens when they overtake our level of technological advancement? How long will it take them? What will they do to us? They cannot be controlled.
How has our control helped the dinosaurs or serpents, Shaper?
Joel gently reminded him.
Control was always our problem. We've wasted millions of years on it. These humans will be different. They don't need us to optimize their genes or find a way to graft wings or fangs onto them so they can survive their primitive phase. They've done that already, without us. Instead of controlling their evolution, let us see if we can advance their civilization. You said we missed our window to do anything, High Shaper. I am not sure that is the case.
What do you propose?
The High Shaper asked.
Let us crash a few automated drones onto the planet's unpopulated areas. Let the humans find our leavings. It will let them know there are others out there, both peaceful and...
Joel thought of the Vortiem still waiting in the void.
not. Perhaps it will springboard their technology even faster. Perhaps our knowledge can be our small contribution, should they truly be fit for the role we have envisioned for them. Perhaps it won't even be needed. It will at least be a worthy show of goodwill when the time comes to approach them. You are worried about what they might do to us. You are not considering the things they could do for us. And what could we do for them?
Joel, you sound more like a guide than a transmographist, Xantham noted.
I'm not so sure the two positions are incompatible anymore,
Joel said.
Slowly, we can reveal what we know to the humans, then step aside so they can make their own choice. And when all is said and done, perhaps we will go to join them and clasp their hands with our own newly human ones. We will have to see.
And what if those hands you want to clasp hold a knife instead?
The High Shaper asked. Several murmurs of agreement came from the bridge crew. Joel offered him the slightest of smiles.
It is a risk, yes. Do you think the humans got so far so quickly by never taking risks? Perhaps that is why our own progress has moved so glacially. Even with the threat of the Vortiem sparking another great galactic war, we move at the speed of dust gathering on a lab console.
It is an interesting plan,
the High Shaper admitted.
Risk or not, it is interesting. For now we will observe. Only observe. Perhaps we can learn how the humans managed to advance so rapidly. Perhaps we can learn if they truly are the ultimate species we sought.
The High Shaper sighed.
Or perhaps we will only learn that we've spent half our civilization's life chasing a goal that we were never destined to achieve.
The higher society's goals, the harder the ground will hit when they fail to reach them, Joel said.
The High Shaper fixed him with a glare.
Such words! What goal would you have given our society to win the contest then?
I believe I've said it before, Joel said, smiling again. Just to sit in the sun.
Xantham and Joel were dismissed shortly afterward. Unable to rest after such an amazing turn of events, they began making their way to the ship mess for a snack.
Well, how do you feel?
Xantham asked as the pair ambled down the long corridors of the mothership.
No one can claim credit for producing the humans, but you did discover them. That's as close as anyone is going to get. Your little speech was impressive, too. For you, I mean. Think they'll take your suggestions?
Maybe. I hope so,
Joel said, pausing to stare out an observation window at the green, white, and blue planet that was even now shrinking as the ship slowly pulled back to the system's edge.
At the very least, we need to understand these humans. They've accomplished something no other species has with how fast they've developed. Was it necessity that drove them? Some hidden potential in their genes? Or just luck?
You know the other civilizations aren't going to believe they did this on their own. They'll think we modified them,
Xantham noted. Joel snorted.
Sounds about right. The one time we get recognition from the others, it's for something we can't actually take credit for,
Joel said.
But they'll learn, I think. I look forward to meeting them, you know.
The other civilizations?
No, the humans, Joel said. The day when I can look a human in the eye and ask him everything I want to ask is far away.
Joel tilted his head.
But maybe not that far. Not if they made it to spaceships in a few thousand years.
You'll probably need a form more familiar to them than that carapaced monstrosity you're using right now, Xantham said. Maybe some middle ground between the humans and our multi-use general form. Something unthreatening. What traits would the humans find threatening? Maybe big eyes, small mouth, short...
We'll figure something out, Joel said. It is a shame, though.
A shame?
I really did enjoy that sloth form.